Welcome to the October 22nd, 2024 meeting of the MCCSC Board of School Trustees. We ask that you please come to order. This is a time set aside to celebrate members of our school community. Ms. Harmon?
Thank you. Thank you, President Hennessy, Dr. Winston, the Board of Trustees, and community members. It's my pleasure to share a few highlights of this month's Celebration of Success and Equity Spotlight Award winners. The Celebration of Success is a feature of every regular Board of School Trustees meeting, and it recognizes the achievement of MCCSC employees, students, and volunteers who make a difference in our school community. For the October Celebration of Success, we would like to recognize Mrs. Stacy Heath, Jackson Creek Middle School inclusion teacher, for her efforts in elevating the collaborative nature of Jackson Creek Middle School. Not only is Mrs. Heath a recognized leader amongst her colleagues, she is well respected amongst students and families alike. Mrs. Heath approaches each learner as unique individuals, worthy of love and support necessary to thrive as a student and person. Mrs. Heath's attention to detail and advocacy for all students to succeed is truly unmatched. Thank you, Mrs. Heath, for all that you do for the students, faculty, staff, and families.
On behalf of the board, thank you for that report, Ms. Harmon, and congratulations to those recognized.
I still have the Equity Spotlight Award.
Wow.
Yes,
I would love to hear more from you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The Equity Spotlight Award recognizes students, faculty, staff, student organizations, schools, and community partners for fostering inclusive environments that reflect the MCCSC mission, vision, and core values. This month's Equity Spotlight Award honors the Bloomington Boys and Girls Club and their Circles program at Bloomington High School South and North. The Circles program offers high school students the opportunity to connect with adults and peers once a week, fostering meaningful relationships and a sense of community. Through valuable mentorship, the program supports youth from diverse backgrounds and experiences, promoting personal growth, self-confidence, and belonging. MCCSC is deeply grateful for this impactful partnership with the Boys and Girls Club Circles program, which continues to make a lasting difference in the lives of our students. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Would it be a board meeting if I didn't botch something? No, it would not. All right. Well, thank you so much, and congrats to those who received those recognitions tonight. Now for our consideration is the consent agenda that includes the following. I don't know why. Y'all, this is what happens when you just slide in a little late. So I skipped a page in my thing here. We will now continue with public comments. We have one public comment tonight. Of course, as always, Mrs. Butcher will ring the bell once to signal you have 30 seconds remaining for your comment and 5 bells to signal that your time has concluded. We have Jenny Noble-Kuchera tonight.
Good evening, President Hennessy, Dr. Winston, and MCCSC School Board of Trustees. I'm Jenny Noble-Kuchera, President of the Monroe County Education Association, and as such, duly elected to speak on behalf of our teachers. At our last Representative Council meeting on October 10th, the MCEA representatives voted unanimously to have me speak to you this evening on behalf of our Templeton Childs teachers. I refer to agenda item 8.03. To be crystal clear, we support action at the community and school levels to mend past inequities and strive towards full integration in MCCSC. Furthermore, we want to make clear that we have valued and will continue to every opportunity, conversation, and meeting that we have had with our MCCSC Executive Board to explore, debate, and problem solve the merger plan to the best of everyone's capability. These meetings were born through the discussion bylaw that you passed last spring. In them, we have had positive collaboration regarding programming, staffing, student well-being, and other critical topics for a successful merger. Our objective tonight is to tell you a bit about what happens before a new school year begins, and to implore you to consider our proposed timeline for our students if they are divided between primary and intermediate grades. First, we ask that any and all materials which we will need to pack and have moved, thanks to our building teams, will be ready to unpack by Friday, June 27th. This date is critical because it takes 4 full weeks to have classrooms, libraries sorted by genre and lexile and on shelves, educational games and math manipulatives organized, furniture in place, paper, composition, notebooks, folders, art supplies, iPads, science lab units in place. Childs-Templeton teachers will also need to have classroom expectations and learning goals posted, bulletin boards decorated, name tags filled out, materials for support staff ready, materials for International Baccalaureate organized, outdoor garden supplies and playground equipment in place, meet the teacher materials ready, and the first 3 days of school lesson plan. Friday, June 27th is our deadline for all classrooms that need to be remodeled, renovated to fit bigger or smaller bodies, and Lord have mercy, actually built to be ready for teachers and paraprofessionals and students to move into. Please consider our students' academic, social, and transitional needs when you look at the merger proposal tonight, and only approve a timeline that allows our teachers to have those 4 critical weeks to fully prepare for what students deserve. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that comment. And with that, our public comment section ends tonight. Now for our consent agenda, includes the following: the memorandum from the executive session, minutes from the preliminary determination and budget hearings and regular board meeting held on September 24th, 2024, overnight out-of-state field trips, financial report from September 2024, appropriation balance report from September 2024, register of claims October 2024, payroll register and payroll claims September 2024, request to declare as surplus and authorize disposal of out-of-date items. Do I have a motion regarding the approval of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Ashley and seconded by Aaron that we approve the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Next for our consideration are the donations. We've received donations of over $14,000. Thank you to all of our donors. Your generosity, as always, is greatly appreciated. Do I have a motion to accept the donations?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Kathy and seconded by Brandon that we accept the donations as presented. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Now we move on to old business, and first for our consideration is the final reading for 2 policies. That's 4213, Student Supervision and Welfare, and 5200, Student Attendance and Truancy Prevention. Is there any motion to adopt the policies as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second. Ross not here tonight.
It's been moved by Ashley and seconded by Brandon that we adopt the policies 4213 and 5200 as presented. Dr. Winston.
Thank you. I'd like to recommend the Board of School Trustees adopt 2 policies, 4213, Student Supervision and Welfare, and 5200, Student Attendance and Truancy Prevention. Changes to these policies were presented for first reading at the September 24th, 2024 meeting of the Board. Any prior policies relating to Policy 4213, Student Supervision and Welfare, and Policy 5200, Student Attendance and Truancy Prevention, are hereby rescinded, deemed null and void, and replaced by the policies adopted on this 22nd day of October 2024. I so recommend.
Thank you, Dr. Winston. Do we have any comments from the board?
I'll just say my comment of irritation at the state legislature, which is that we are now required at some point to send a kid an affidavit with a prosecuting attorney if they're habitually truant, and that's pushing us into a school to prison pipeline that we should not have to be in. I mean, kids miss school for all kinds of reasons, and they shouldn't start having a record. So that's my moment of irritation.
I share that, and I think Yeah, I mean, I think, especially this board, over the past 4 or 5 years, we've been very sort of vocal about our, you know, decision to look at disciplinary disparity and what does that look like and how does it affect our students and who does it affect at what rates. I mean, this is work that we've been doing, and now to be sort of legislated by the state to do certain kinds of things that we would frankly not do or we would advise against, I think is, yeah, very frustrating to say the least. Any other comments? All right. All those in favor of the motion to adopt policies 4213, student supervision and welfare, and 5200, student attendance and truancy prevention as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? That motion carries. Next, for our consideration is the personnel report. Do I have a motion to approve the personnel and additional personnel reports as presented?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Ashley and seconded by Brandon that we approve the personnel and additional personnel reports as presented. Dr. Henderson.
President Hennessy, Dr. Winston, and members of the Board of School Trustees, at this time I request that you please approve the recommendations as presented in your board packet in the personnel report and the additional personnel report.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson. Any comments from the board? Okay. In lieu of comments, all those in favor of the motion to approve the personnel and additional personnel reports, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? The motion carries. We move on to contracts. Do I have a motion to approve the contracts as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second? It's been moved by Ashley and seconded by Aaron that we approve the contracts as presented. Mr. Kenny.
Good evening, President Hennessy, Dr. Winston, members of the board. There are 11 contracts before you tonight. I would like to highlight the contract with Ameriben Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. The MCCSC Insurance Committee is recommending a change in medical administrative insurance providers from United Healthcare to Anthem Ameriben. Anthem Ameriben is providing significant savings to administer our medical services for MCCSC employees. The cost of the claims and services are paid from the Insurance Reserve Fund, which is supported financially by both MCCSC contributions and MCCSC employees' contributions. This switch in administrative services providers provides for an estimated 5% reduction in the rate increase for MCCSC and MCCSC employees. Along with the change in medical administrative services providers, the Insurance Committee recommends a premium rate increase of 9.1% for calendar year 2025. A detailed analysis of expected health insurance costs was provided by our third-party administrator, JA Benefits. This analysis of expected claims for the calendar year 2025 led to the recommendation of a 9.1% increase in premiums. I recommend that you approve this contract and the other contracts presented to you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny. Do I have any comments from the board? Okay. All those in favor of the motion to approve the contracts signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Next, we move on to budget resolutions and the recommendation to adopt the 2025 budget resolutions. Resolution 2024-15, appropriations and tax rates for the 2025 budget. Resolution 2024-16, 2025 capital projects plan. And Resolution 2024-17, 2025 bus replacement plan. Do I have a motion to adopt the 2025 budget resolutions 2024-15, 16, and 17 as presented?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Who was the jinx?
I said jinx, but I thought you and I were.
It was you and Ashley.
Okay.
I don't. Go Ashley.
Okay, so it's been moved by Ashley, seconded by Kathy, that we adopt the 2025 budget resolutions 24-15, 16, and 17 as presented. Mr. Kenny.
Thank you. It is recommended that the board adopt the resolution of appropriations and tax rates for the 2025 budgets. It is further recommended the board adopt the resolutions approving the 2025 capital projects plan and the 2025 bus replacement plan. The board received information regarding the 2025 budgets on September 24th, 2024, when the 2025 budgets were presented. No objections to the budgets, tax levies, or tax rates have been received by the school corporation. Regarding the school bus replacement plan, Indiana Code 20-40-18-9 provides that before a school corporation may use money in the operations fund for replacing school buses, a resolution approving the school bus replacement plan must be submitted to the Department of Local Government Finance. Regarding the capital projects plan, Indiana Code 20-40-18-6 states that if a school corporation wants to use money in the operations fund for expenditures related to capital asset acquisition or expenditures that are capital in nature, the governing body must adopt a resolution approving the plan and submit the resolution to the Department of Local Government Finance. The board is required by Indiana statute to meet no later than November 8th, 2024, for the purpose of adopting a budget for the upcoming year. Appropriate notices to taxpayers were published designating the time, date, and location of the September 24th, 2024 hearing on the proposed budgets and the time, date, and location of the meeting to adopt the proposed budgets and plans. Having met the statutory requirements regarding the publication of and hearings on the proposed 2025 budgets and plans, the administration recommends the board approve resolutions adopting those budgets and plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny. Do we have any comments from the board? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion to approve the budget resolutions signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Okay, so now we move on to district updates, and tonight we have several district updates to be presented. First is a presentation on equity goal number 1, which is access and opportunity from Dr. Henderson.
Good evening again, President Hennessy, Dr. Winston, and members of the Board of School Trustees. Thank you for the opportunity to present this evening on equity goal number 1, access and opportunity. As a general reminder to those in attendance and watching from home, the 2021 through 2025 strategic plan contains 4 equity goals, 1 communication goal, 2 diversity goals, and 2 funding goals. This evening, I'm happy to provide the board with an update on equity goal number 1, study and develop programs in schools for increased options to meet student needs, including ensuring safe and reliable transportation that efficiently increases access and choice to schools and programs, with identified outcomes of maximizing student instructional time and increasing student academic results. Since Mrs. Harmon recently presented to the board on academic results, I will focus my time this evening on the outcome of maximizing instructional time through safe and reliable transportation of students. Data from August of 2023 to the start of October 2024 shows a consistent reduction in the average minutes delayed per late route, consistently trending towards 0. Likewise, average lost instructional time is directly related to getting students to school on time each day. You'll also notice that since August of 2023, this is also trending towards 0. I think it's especially important to note that these reductions have been made while we are increasing services to provide greater access to ALPS and pre-K. Thanks to our referendum, we've been able to expand our pre-K services, ensuring that students are ready to learn when they enter kindergarten. With pre-K expansion, we have added 177 pre-K students to our bus routes. Despite these additions, we've continued to reduce delays and lost instructional time. Wanted to highlight a few accomplishments with you this evening and the improvements in the department. We have 96 corporation drivers, 11 of which are substitute drivers. We have 6 individuals who serve as on-call drivers and 2 athletic drivers who take midweek athletic trips that leave early. There are 14 other employees who possess a CDLB license in case of emergency, and we also employ 22 bus monitors. We're currently operating 94 routes to help minimize ride time for students and improve on-time performance. Feedback from principals indicate that buses are consistently arriving on time for drop-off and pickup. We have the ability to continue to improve our on-time service, even with the programmatic additions that were previously mentioned. When all drivers are ill, when drivers are ill, substitute drivers are assigned to the routes. When sub-drivers are insufficient to cover absences, other employees such as mechanics, maintenance personnel, and transportation staff who possess the CDLB license step in to fill routes, or routes are split, meaning that a nearby route will pick up a portion of the uncovered route to ensure that students arrive on time and safely to school. As previously mentioned, these improvements in on-time performance and reduced loss of instructional time continue to happen even while increasing access to ALPS and a 70% increase in pre-K enrollment. Every pre-K student is required to be buckled into their seat, which, as you can imagine, increases bus loading time over older students for whom that's an option. When we look to our future work in this area, we want to continue to study route optimization opportunities to decrease ride time for students. We want to continue to investigate ways for transportation to increase choice for families and explore the viability of offering after-school activity buses to allow increased access to clubs, extracurricular activities, and athletic programs for those students for which transportation is a barrier to participation. With the improvements that have been made over the course of this strategic plan to transportation that have reduced the lost instructional time, and the conversation about access and opportunity could begin to shift to encompass the topics of engagement, intervention and enrichment, and access to curricular and extracurricular programming. As a reminder to our community, we are wrapping up the current strategic plan this school year, so we invite members of our community to help inform our future strategic plan by providing feedback using the QR code displayed on the screen or by visiting our website. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to share our continued progress in our transportation department this evening. And as a reminder, during the November board meeting, Mr. Kinney will be presenting on funding goal number 1 and number 2.
Thank you so much. Are there any comments from the board?
I just want to say how grateful I am. It's an incredible achievement when you consider, I think 3 years ago or more, where we had bus drivers with paper, maps trying to figure out the routes. We've improved the technology, we've improved the pay thanks to the community with referendum, and we've improved that even with the staggered time so that kids get to school on time. I'm really excited at the idea of looking at after school transportation for kids for whom that barrier exists, and so I think that's an exciting report. Super exciting. And thanks to everyone who did all that work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to all of our drivers and transportation department and all of the people working through those mapping issues and all of that stuff. It's a huge undertaking, and we've seen other districts having enormous issues with that stuff as well. So yeah, a lot of work and a lot of progress there. Any other comments? Questions? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going to move into our next agenda item, which reads as the commitments and guiding principles for balancing socioeconomic status. This is something that the board has put together alongside Dr. Winston to really think about what our commitments and guiding principles are for this work that we're doing. And this extends beyond the merger, but it is really thinking about the work as a whole of balancing socioeconomic status in our district. And so I'm going to go ahead and read that to you. This is already signed by the board. The Monroe County Board of School Trustees has committed to equity-focused work through both individual and collective commitments. As part of that work, the board established the MCCSC 5-year strategic plan. The plan's priorities, which have guided board decisions and administrative efforts, are centered around equity, diversity, communication, and funding. Finding a way to remedy the inequities that occur as a result of socioeconomic imbalance in our district is in line with those priorities. Since elementary attendance zones have not been comprehensively modified since 1997, and because we've seen population density changes, our attendance zones have been impacted. Guided by decades-long research, educational experts, and consultants, our work to balance socioeconomic status in our schools is an effort to ensure that we do not perpetuate patterns of segregation in our district. Moreover, we endeavor to afford all students the opportunities, access, and academic success they deserve by delivering innovative and stimulating instruction in classrooms that reflect the range of lived experiences across our district. As members of the Monroe County Community School Corporation Board of School Trustees, our work is guided by the following definition of educational equity. And this is a definition that you've seen on our website before and some of our other work as well. So it's the working definition for our district. When educational policies, practices, interactions, and resources are representative of, constructed by, and responsive to all people such that each individual has access to, can meaningfully participate, and has positive outcomes from high-quality learning experience that empowers them towards self-determination and reduces disparities in outcomes regardless of individual characteristics and cultural identities. We are guided by the following shared beliefs and principles. Centering the needs of students in all decision-making ensures we, the board, fulfill our duty to the community. Inclusive and diverse learning environments create safe and welcoming schools where all students can thrive. Equitable access to supports and services for every student in every classroom ensures that the academic, behavioral, and social-emotional needs of all students are met. Adequate support for educators, families, and students to participate in processes ensures a shared vision for diversity and inclusion. Safe passage to and from for every student, from school for every student provides a strong foundation for success. To ensure these principles are put into action, we make the following student-centered, evidence-based commitments to our community as we balance socioeconomic status throughout our school corporation. Authentic engagement. We commit to listening through implementation. We commit to a proactive approach in gathering feedback from varied and diverse community groups that are representative of the entire school community. Transparency. We commit to sharing information about how we identify areas of need and how that informs decision-making, policy creation, and resource allocation. We commit to high-quality, rigorous curriculum and instruction. We commit to provide the requisite staff, learning spaces, instructional materials, and professional learning to ensure an equitable education for all students. We commit to providing teachers, staff, and leadership with time to collaborate and plan. We commit to decisions that minimize learning disruption for students. Under the bullet of equity, access, and opportunity, we commit to providing facilities where students can learn in a safe, age-appropriate, and welcoming environment. We commit to closing the opportunity gap between students from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, and we commit to providing learning spaces and experiences that promote a positive and safe school climate and culture. Finally, to meet our commitments to our community, we direct the MCCSC superintendent to establish a system of accountability to the following indicators: positive school climate and culture, kindergarten readiness, early literacy and numeracy rates, attendance, student social emotional health, culturally responsive positive behavior interventions and supports, also known as PBIS, and a decrease in opportunity gaps. As a board, we envision our schools as preeminent institutions of learning that empower all students to thrive in a safe and inclusive environment. The guidelines and commitments outlined here will serve as the guardrails toward achieving our vision. That is signed, and it will be posted on our website for those of you to review, again, because I know that's a lot to digest in just listening. So Are there any comments from the board on this work or on these guiding commitments and principles?
I think it's really well outlined in all the sentiment that we've been talking about and a lot of the things we've been hearing back from the community, but also the conversations that we've had at our different community meetings. And I think it's a nice foundation for us for the things that we're doing.
Thank you, Kathy. Other comments? All right, I just want to thank Dr. Winston for her help and work as we've moved through that process. And now we will move on to our Childs-Templeton update.
Thank you, President Hennessy. Thank you for the opportunity as well to provide some assistance and support as you all have worked toward establishing your commitments and guiding principles toward balancing SES. It certainly provides excellent guidance to myself and our team as we continue to move forward in this endeavor. As I have the opportunity each month to provide an update on where we are with our Childs-Templeton merger efforts, I'm excited to be able to share a few key highlights, but I don't want to take too much time because I want to make sure that we have sufficient time set aside for the update regarding our facilities review. You'll recall that this is the process that we established several months ago, that we were going to engage with our community through a robust community engagement process, that we are going to study and examine best practices from other districts across the country and throughout the state of Indiana, and we're going to spend a lot of time looking at data and reviewing that data and information. And then certainly the third component of this merger process is the comprehensive facilities assessment that you'll hear the findings of within the next few minutes. Just a reminder of the charter that was established and the things that are within scope of this particular effort and those things that are outside of scope, but most importantly, the expected deliverables that we want to be able to bring forward with our recommendations and considerations and scenarios that we will share with you during the months of November and December. The framework that we established early on was this framework here. I'm not going to go through and read all of the components, but certainly to remind everyone that all 6 of these components are front and center of the work that we're doing each and every week and each and every day. Tonight, there are 5 areas that we want to make sure that you are updated on. I want to give you just a little bit of an update on where we are with community engagement since the last time I had a chance to speak with you. We've had questions from board members and community members and some of our teachers about what does the transfer data look like. So it's helpful for us to be able to share that information with you this evening. There are a number of complexities. I shared 5 complexities at the September board meeting. I'm going to also share some of those same complexities, but I want to share those from the parent voice. During the last several weeks, we've had a chance to engage with our families around what makes a family-friendly merger. What does a family-friendly transportation system look like? What does a family-friendly extended day look like? And so they've been very helpful to us in providing very insightful information and perspectives regarding the pain points that they are anticipating that we want to try to circumvent as best we can. We will also share with you a few instructional considerations that are at play as we ultimately will bring forward information for the board to act upon. And then we will conclude this update with a report from CSO. Community engagement. So this slide here just highlights for you all of the different entities that we've been able to interact with. We certainly met with our faith-based partners back in September. We had 14 participants at that time. We wanted to make sure to have some time to meet with families of students with disabilities. So we've already had 1 session. We have at least 1 or 2 more sessions that are to be scheduled. And those sessions, the first session was held at Templeton Elementary, and we had a good participation. We also were able to hear firsthand some of the fears and concerns and worries of families regarding transition and the transition supports that are necessary in order to make sure that our students with disabilities, some of our most vulnerable students, have access to what they need to make a successful transition. We continue to meet with our MCEA discussion council. We have a community parent and guardians group that met earlier this month. And we had a second community forum, and this community forum was held at Templeton Elementary, I think it was last week. And so we are very appreciative of the support and the participation of members throughout our community to come forward and to share with us their perspectives on what makes a successful merger and what that would look like. To date, we have received 54 submissions from our online form asking families and community members to share with us concerns, questions, suggestions regarding our merger efforts. Some of the questions that we've been asked and that we're working on: how many students currently attend Childs and Templeton are transfer students? We will share some of that information this evening. How many of those students are also a part of the multi-age program? What schools are transferred students zoned to attend? In other words, if they weren't transferring to one of these two schools, where would they attend? What feedback do parents have regarding transportation and other important topics? What factors will impact the final grade level building configuration decision for the plan? So these are just a few of the questions that we've been asked and that we are grappling with throughout our engagement process. As it relates to the Childs-Templeton transfer data, at Templeton, we currently have 412 students enrolled. That's as of October 18th. We know that number changes each and every day. Of those 412 students, approximately 354 students reside in the Templeton area and are attending the school that they are expected to attend based upon their residence. That's 86%. We have approximately 14%, or 57 students, that are transferred both within and outside. Of the 57 transfers, what you will see here is that 68% of those transfers, and in size of 39, are in single grade classrooms, kindergarten, first, second, third, so on and so forth. 61% of those transfer requests have been for stability of setting or because of being unhoused. 30% are in our multi-age classrooms, and 12% are the children of staff who work in the building. In reference to the schools from which these children are transferring: Rogers-Benford, Fairview, Arlington, and Childs. Of the transfers from Childs, 1 mentioned multi-age, and the remaining 5 referenced stability of setting. So this gives you a little bit of a context in terms of the numbers of children who are attending a school that is not within their zoned area. As it relates to Childs, this kind of shows you the breakdown across all of the schools. So of the 57, what percentage of the students who are transferring and which schools are they transferring from? I only highlighted the top 4 schools, but you see that there are transfers across the corporation. At Childs, we have a total of 447 students currently enrolled. 357 of those students live in the Childs area. 90 of those students are transfers into Childs, approximately 20% of the enrollment, both within and outside. Of the 90 transfers, 61%, or 55 students, requested transfer for stability of setting. 0% were due to McKinney-Vento or being unhoused. And 20%, approximately 18 students, are children of staff who work in the building. The top 4 schools from which transfers are coming: Rogers-Benford, Summit, Templeton, Highland Park. Of these, all mention stability of setting as the reason for their transfer request. And the next slide will show you also the schools from which those 90 students are coming. And the next slide, I think, is the final slide regarding transfer data. This kind of just gives a synopsis of those students who are enrolled outside of their zone school. So for example, at Childs, it's kind of a little bit repetitive, but we wanted to kind of summarize it in this manner by indicating that at Childs, approximately 18% of the students live outside of the child's area. And at Templeton, approximately 13% live outside of the child's area. We thought it was equally as important to share with you that approximately 19% across the district of our students, almost 20% of our students, do not attend the school to which they are zoned. And on the flip side, you see what the numbers are for what percentage of students reside in and attend the school to which they are zoned to attend. And at the very bottom of this slide, you'll see transferring into MCCSC. These numbers also include students who do not reside within our boundaries, but they are requesting a transfer into our schools. So approximately 2% of the transfers at Childs are coming from outside of the corporation, and approximately 1% of the children who transfer into Templeton are coming from outside of the corporation. And as a corporation, approximately 3% of our students are transferring into our schools from outside of our boundaries. Last month, I talked about these particular complexities and the degree to which they make it difficult to make a simple decision regarding our merger conversations. I spent a little bit of time talking about staffing, transportation, food services, extended day, rooms, and space. While we didn't ask our families about each of these 5, we were able to gather some information because we wanted to know what our parents thought about these things and what are the pain points. The question really was centered around what does a family-friendly response look like? So in terms of staffing, while we didn't think they would have a strong thought on that, they actually shared some really insightful pieces of information that we want to be considerate of. The first point that they highlighted for staffing is they wanted to make sure that each school has teachers from both schools so that the students see familiar faces throughout the course of the school day. Current teachers should help create rosters for the students that are moving schools, and teachers should have time to collaborate. So those are the top 3. Those are not the only things that they mentioned, but those are the top 3 items that our families wanted to make sure that we took into consideration and that we reflected upon and figured out how can we address some of those areas. As it relates to transportation, much conversation has been had regarding having walkers take a bus from their zone school to the other school. Families talked a lot about older siblings, walking younger siblings to school, and a pain point of potentially not having that as an option going forward. And one option that they put on the table for our consideration is having our students walk to their zone school or their neighborhood school and potentially catch a bus to go to the other school. They certainly want us to pay attention to the amount of time that our students are on buses. They want us to pay very close attention to school traffic patterns, parking, bus lanes. They want us to minimize drop-offs. To the degree possible, they'd like to see us keep siblings together. And they want us to give consideration to staggered start times for and against. As many people offered one suggestion, we had just as many folks offering an alternate suggestion. But these are some of the ones that were front and center. As it relates to transition supports, they suggested that we host events so that everyone has familiarity with people and space and they get a chance to know each other before the first day of school. They offered the suggestion of having school tours, having joint PTO activities, phase the merger so that no students go back and forth. For example, one of the specific concerns that we've heard is if somebody has a second grader right now, and if third grade happens to be in a building other than where that child attends now, would we give some consideration so that that child doesn't have to then transition to another school, and then for fourth grade transition potentially to another school? And so minimizing some of the transitions if we can do some phased-in options. And then, of course, thinking about transition time for students with disabilities. So those are just a few of the things for transition. Regarding extended day, lots of conversation has been had regarding extended day. Offering flexible options. Some families said, I only need extended day 2 or 3 days a week. Is that something that I could get? Right now, the way it works, that's not a possibility, but our team is certainly exploring all options across the corporation. Try to have consistency among staff to help students feel comfortable. Well, we would love that. Um, but the staffing of extended day is a challenge. We often employ college students as part of our staffing plan at extended day. Offer a transfer bus between schools for extended day and allow parents to choose which school. That comes from parent concerns of having a second grade student in one school, a fifth or sixth grade student in a second school, and trying to figure out what the extended day options are going to be available to them, and perhaps minimizing the likelihood of two different extended day situations being required for them. And then they also talked about having a shorter option for extended day. And then finally, our parent voice talked about current activities. What do you like about your current school that you want to make sure that we maintain throughout this merger? Lots of the current clubs, activities, student performances, evening events, annual events that happen at each of our schools, and then several activities that both schools do and opportunities for new things. So as you can see, this is just a very short list of many of the things that we've been discussing, but our parents and community partners and our teachers have done an excellent job of providing us with some of the pain points and some of the areas of concern. But what I also appreciate, while they have brought concerns, they've also brought some potential suggestions and solutions to help us in thinking about that. The next slide really is about school configurations considerations, and Mrs. Harmon is going to speak on this.
Thank you, Dr. Winston, for the opportunity. Oops, I went one too far. Words. I will speak through them. Oh, it just got reversed somehow. Here we go. I'll go backwards when it's time. Okay, so instructional considerations. And again, this is just a highlight of some of the things that we have talked about, but an important aspect of it. So as we have spoken with families and particularly staff and had these engagement sessions, we've talked about if we're looking at a primary and intermediate model, wanted to kind of put out the consideration instructionally of a pre-K through 3 school as a primary model and a 4 through 6 as an intermediate model, and explain some of the reasonings for that. Of course, again, as a caveat to this, there are opinions on both sides of all of these, but this is kind of where collectively we've come from. We like the pre-K through 3 and grades 4 through 6, alignment and coherence for literacy and numeracy in terms of where those students are in the development of those schools. It supports cohesive and aligned literacy and numeracy goals. Pre-K through 3, early literacy, developing those foundational skills, and then 4 through 6, reading to learn, right? And using that in that way. Additionally, instructional guidance and accountability from the Department of Education also kind of gives us some reason to feel this way. As you may be aware, iRead, all third graders are expected to show proficiency in reading through iRead by third grade. And this is the first year that all those students took it in second grade. This is the first year that they're required to take it in second grade as well. So again, having a school that is serving both second graders and third graders as they kind of go through that process seemed like a good opportunity. And we imagine that perhaps that same kind of thing is going to come on the numeracy side from the DOE as well. Also, we've spoken a lot, both from families and teachers, about the opportunity for leadership and mentorship in schools, in elementary schools, between older students and younger students, and discussed that we feel third graders developmentally are ready for leadership and mentorship in roles that second graders just may not be. Again, lots of things people reference, book buddies, for instance. If they are at that third grade level where they are now confident readers or getting there, they can partner, they can do that. Second graders just may not be there yet. And then other opportunities for mentorship and leadership that the third graders are ready to take on, and as a general. Regardless of the configuration, things that we wanted to highlight that we've discussed of importance is considering the importance of flexible learning spaces and accessible classrooms, the importance of that. Spaces that support a variety of instructional models. For instance, enough space in a classroom to do a small group station, right? And also have students interacting independently over here or with some classmates. Teachers and principals are resourceful. We use the physical space we have. Certainly, right, you can provide instruction for a student in a hallway at a desk, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way. So we want to ensure that we have enough those spaces, those flexible spaces, those shared spaces that are necessary for really optimal learning. And then again, of course, a large part of our discussion has been attending to transition disruption as we go that we manage our short-term goals while achieving this SES balance, that we consider the students in our schools, we ensure that we're protecting their educational outcomes as we make these decisions, and that is prioritized as well. And those are really the highlights that we wanted to give in terms of instructional considerations at this point. And then I'll go back. Just to highlight here are where we are in terms of our upcoming community engagement meeting. This Thursday, our advisory groups of both our staff and our parents, families, guardians come together. And then October 31st, we're meeting with community leaders. November 7th, we have another community forum at Childs, this time at Childs Elementary from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And on November 12th, we have another opportunity for families and parents of students with disabilities. This meeting on November 12th will be at Childs. We previously had one at Templeton. They are open to all families to engage in, just additional locations. We are looking about developing how we will have student engagement. That has come up again. It's something that we really value in this corporation, student voice. And so we want to identify the ways in which we will engage students in these conversations as well. And then November 19th, at the November board meeting, our update and first draft of scenario considerations presentation.
That concludes this portion of the Childs-Templeton update.
Thank you, Dr. Winston. It looks like we could take comments now, or we could move into hearing from Brent and hold comments and questions until after. How do you prefer? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Okay. Well, why don't we do that? So we will now hear from CSO Representative Brent Height regarding an update on the facilities of both Childs and Templeton Elementary Schools. Thanks for being with us tonight.
I'd like to just, as we prepare for Mr. Height to come forward and present, I'd just like to extend a special thank you and appreciation for the numerous endless hours that he and his team have spent in really visiting our schools, walking our schools, studying our schools, and helping us to better understand what's possible. So thank you so very much for all that you've already done and that you will continue to help us doing in the future.
It was our pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. As mentioned, I am Brent Height. I'm with CSO. We're an architecture firm out of Indianapolis, and we have a long history here in MCCSC. Have completed several different projects with you guys, including the original 2017 facility assessment, which gave us a really strong foundation to kind of start this endeavor with you guys. So I'm excited to be here and share kind of the work we've been doing over the last few months. And without further ado, I'll jump into it and kind of share. So starting with the facility assessment piece, we really, like I mentioned, wanted to build on the foundation of where we started with in 2017 because that was a very comprehensive facility assessment that was district-wide for every facility, not just schools, even some of the transportation building, admin building, all of this kind of other buildings were in that assessment. So in that assessment, we graded or evaluated everything with this framework that's up on the slide right now, looking at primarily 3 different areas of assessment, and that is code compliance, safety, and environment. So that's looking at things like ADA accessibility, wheelchair access, exiting, fire code, all of those kind of building components that really go into whether a school is a safe and equitable place to be. Educational adequacy, that is really getting to Mrs. Harmon's comments about how you want to deliver instruction and what types of spaces need to be available to do that. So while a 900 square foot classroom hasn't changed a whole lot in 60 years, the way we deliver instruction has, and there may need to be additional support spaces to do that. So as we look at different buildings, trying to judge those things as we're of what may be omitted or missing, because when that building was constructed, that wasn't a thought. And then looking at the major systems and the maintenance and efficiency of the building, the major systems of the building, so that's your HVAC, your roof, your windows, exterior envelope, and then even from a lot of your elementaries have added solar panels and looking at the efficiency of the operation of the building. So those are the three major categories that we evaluated. There's over 50 line items that we evaluated for each building, looking in those three different categories. And we rated them on this scale of 1 to 5 that you see on the screen. 1 is high, so that's your kind of brand new out the box. I will admit to you that in most K-12 clients that we work with, there aren't a lot of 1s because things don't stay number 1 very long. There's a lot of use, a lot of abuse, and so they don't stay there long. So Try North, your newest facility in the district, is gorgeous, but it already has some things that are starting to show some wear, even though it's only been in operation a couple years. And then that scales all the way down to a 5. So a 5 being, a highest priority item that really needs to start to be considered. We need to get this in the maintenance plan to address this item, if that makes sense. So going now, oh, sorry. So now going into each facility a little bit, we have this cover page really just to give some background information on each facility. So starting with Childs Elementary, it was opened in 1967, so it's an over 60-year building. It's been there a long time. It's about 58,000 square feet, and we are estimating or calculating capacity to be about 480 students. You can see on the left side there's a list of improvements that have happened to that facility over its lifespan. So there's a lot of significant updates and investments that have been made there. So it's not just been built in 1967 and left. There's been a lot of time and what we might call band-aids over the time of making improvements to that facility. Just for some general awareness as we start to look at some of the building options later, it's good to be aware of what site constraints we have on both facility sites. Looking at Childs, it's a fairly small site for an elementary school, even though it is on the smaller side from a district capacity standpoint for an elementary school. With the blue region you see kind of staked through the middle there's a creek that runs through the back of Childs, and there's a large floodway that has been designated by the Federal Emergency Management Association along that creek for 100-year event floods. That area is a space essentially demarcated out that you cannot build anything vertically in that space. So you could build parking lots and playgrounds, that's fine. But if you were trying to build a structure over that, it wouldn't really be possible or exceedingly cost prohibitive to do so. The red line around the outside is essentially designating the property line of that area. And then we've tried to call out with the yellow dashed line and the blue dashed lines where site circulation is happening. So those yellow dashed lines along the front is where buses come in queue and pick up and drop off. And the yellow around the back is where parents will queue and wrap around for pickup and drop off. Looking at the building usage, in this you'll see kind of color coding of the floor plan. As we look at the space, we kind of classified different parts of the space based off their usage. So the blue are your general classrooms, so that's going to be your first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. And then we've classified the pre-K classrooms or kindergarten classrooms a little bit differently because they're outfitted just slightly differently than a standard classroom. There's a special ed classroom. There's only one in this building. And then the exploratory classrooms. So those are your specials. Those are your music, your art, your PE, media center type spaces. They don't count towards your enrollment because they're part of the general instruction of the building. And then the last item you can see on there is kind of a light blue. Those are your support services. So those are Title I if it exists, speech, intervention, small group, just spaces that have been allocated for those additional student supports. So again, same framework as we look at Templeton. Templeton is larger, so at 70,000 square feet versus the 58 at Childs, and built in 1993, so significantly newer than Childs is. It's an interesting historical note that Templeton is actually a rebuild of the original building for Templeton Elementary, so it's been through that process before. looking to the left, you can still see, though, even being built in 1993, there has been significant investment in that facility over time, and even some improvements that Childs has not seen yet, like LED lighting. There's been some finished updates inside, and the solar array on the roof. As we look at that same site, I think one of the things to highlight here is just kind of the small available land area with the red property land around the outside. If you look at the GIS, which is a fancy kind of map software, you can tell where properties were previously purchased, where homes used to be to expand this current site. So just an interesting tidbit as things evolve over time. But obviously, it's always been considered a tight site. We demarcated the same circulation guidelines here with the yellow buses and the blue parent drop-off areas. It does sound like pickup in the afternoons a little bit less rigid than just this blue line. I think there's some parking in parking lots and kids walk, but this is kind of just general guidance. And then we've also highlighted in yellow where the current playground project is ongoing, just to know that that's part of this equation as well. Moving into the building, so same process as we color code the usage within the building. Blue are our general classrooms. Pre-K and K classrooms are in orange. And then our SPED classrooms, which you'll notice there are 3 in this building. Exploratory or special classrooms, again, same thing, they're in purple. And then the student support services, excuse me, are that light blue color. You'll also notice that there are more of those student support service spaces allocated in Templeton. Excuse me. Part of that is because there is space available in Templeton for that, with their enrollments having gone down somewhat. They had some additional spaces available that they were able to turn into some support services areas that has allowed them to kind of provide those additional services and have space to do so. So it's just kind of a lucky break that sometimes schools get to do that. One of the things that I would mention is when we've calculated enrollments and capacities of this building as we look forward, we're using those spaces and still counting them as classrooms. Because in our opinion, if you need that space for a classroom, those services then get pushed back out into the hallways and corridors and other office spaces, because it's primarily important to have places to put butts in seats in the classrooms. So while we did an exhaustive, as I mentioned, over 50 line item assessment of each building, scoring each of those criteria, we're not going to go through that tonight just for the sake of time. It is a very detailed report, but we're going to kind of fast forward into kind of the merger outlook and see how that may influence or impact some of the conversation that you're having. I think one of the things that we became quickly aware of with your administrative team is that the facility improvements that may be needed at either of these facilities are likely going to be a conversation that needs to happen regardless of what happens with the merger plan. So just something to be aware of as we're considering these things. But we're going to start looking at what we kind of made recommendations to the admin team and to you as must-dos prior to grade level realignment. We know that some of there were some issues raised by your community members, and we have looked extensively at those as we toured these buildings to make sure that we had adequate insight and knowledge of what was going on at each facility. So the first there, the repairing masonry wall cracks at Childs, and actually we found some of the same issues at Templeton. We had 2 different engineers come out on site and look at those issues and separately, so different companies, and they both gave us very similar reports to those issues, that the cracking in those walls is primarily cosmetic. There's a steel structure that supports that building. The masonry walls are just perimeter. And so the best way to do it was best remedy was to make repairs to those walls and then just continue to monitor those walls to make sure they don't get worse. We are in the process of working with Sam and his team and the engineers to what those remedies are to be and how to get those implemented. But that was one of the things that we identified as that's something that should happen immediately, and really regardless of a merger or non-merger, just something that needs to be taken care of. The next item was addressing the air quality concerns within Childs. That's something that's already been taken care of. The CO2 levels were reported high in select classrooms. I think there may have been one or two. Um, so that's an easily adjustable item with the HVAC systems that are implemented in these buildings to increase the outside air transfer. So that's been already resolved. And then one of the other issues that I'll mention that we heard about was in the 1990s addition at Childs. There's a 10 classroom, 2-story corridor. Is that often that it feels and smells a little muggy or humid in those spaces. That is really a product of the mechanical or HVAC system that's in that part of the building. They're called unit ventilators, and they don't have humidity control. So the humidity in that wing is high, and you're really just all you're smelling is just the humidity level being higher. There's no mold or mildew or anything like that to be concerned of. There's really nothing in that part of the building that can grow mold. So that's kind of the benefit there, and so that's not necessarily an issue, but it is identified in the facility assessment as we look at the overall life cycle of that HVAC system for the building as something that long-term likely needs to be addressed, and you'll see that kind of subsequently as we go down this list. So those were our must-do identifiers, were really just the air quality concern at Childs and the repairing the masonry walls at Childs and Templeton. And as I mentioned, those are both either already resolved or in process of seeking that resolution. Moving on from our must-do, looking at should consider prior to that grade level realignment. One of the items which you'll see is creating additional kindergarten classrooms, and this is really a district level priority. It's not going to be a building code implemented decision. As you look around your district, you have various versions of kindergarten classrooms, and it's whether you feel they need to be larger or have a designated restroom inside the classroom versus kindergarten students using regular group restrooms like the other grade levels. So that's just kind of an option that's out there. Adjusting toilet fixture heights, that's primarily a concern for your pre-K and kindergarten students. ADA has different guidelines depending on age level because they're different sizes of students. So when we look at that, if we were going to put all of your pre-K and K students into one building, we might want to look at adjusting some of those heights to accommodate and relate directly to those kids. Upgrading playground at Childs. So especially as we look at the new playground at Templeton, I don't know that we need to continue to meet that level of expectation, but we certainly want to make sure it's age appropriate depending on which level of kids is at which building, and provide them an equitable experience. And then upgrading lighting and HVAC systems at Childs, which I mentioned the HVAC already. The original boiler and chiller, I think, are pretty ancient, and especially in the original part of the building at Childs. And then there's still fluorescent lighting rather than LEDs. As you walk through that building, you can feel that light level, especially if you've been in a building with LEDs. It's just kind of a night and day difference. And then improving ADA accessibility at Childs. Anybody who's been in that building can probably comment on the different levels. All of the current provisions in that building have provided a level of access for someone in a wheelchair, but the experience, I would argue, is not fully ADA accessible. And the reason for that is in 1967, when that building was built, ADA didn't exist. So those were all of the requirements have been retrofitted essentially back into that building to provide. There's a lift that goes from the upper level down to the 2-story portion. There's some ramping around the building. There's even up, if you think of the main entrance, there's an accessible way to get in, but maybe not the most ideal. So there are certainly items there we think we could improve. And then finally, understanding the long-term community investment. So that's kind of looking at this through the lens of Childs and Templeton. I've been here for 30 and 60 years respectively, and we plan for them to be here for another 30 and 60 years or longer. What does that look like in the grand scheme of things? So what we're tagging there are maybe a major renovation or replacement of Childs with a new facility, aligned to whatever grade level decision happens to be made. Combining Childs and Templeton into one pre-K 6 building, and there are different options within that. And then to Mrs. Harmon's previous comments, most of the things you're going to see in these options we develop have been developed in isolation, and we really think there needs to be some thought given to the pedagogical alignment, student services, and family support programs of your district so that we can make sure that the space is allocated correctly for those programs. And it's not just classrooms with butts and seats, but it's a learning environment that's going to support your students. So from there, I'll move into some enrollment information that we looked at. So we looked at combining the 23 and 24 class enrollment and then redistributed that out into the grade level sections. So as we combine both enrollments from both schools, along the left-hand side of that first table, you'll see kind of grade levels pre-K through 6, the total enrollment from both buildings being totaled together. It's a total of 858 students, and then redivided out into the number of sections required to serve those students in those pre-K through 6th grade levels. So it totals to 37 sections. Why that's important to me is that says I need at least 37 classrooms to fill 37 sections or give 37 teachers a home. So just a few high-level takeaways as we look at that. That's 8 pre-K and K classrooms total. Both buildings today have less than 4 pre-K or K classrooms. So as we go back to that should consider list, should we consider outfitting kindergarten classrooms to put all of those pre-K and K students in one building? 29 general classrooms would be needed then after those 8 pre-K and K. 5 classrooms for special education and student support services will be needed. And then we need to consider a little bit of what's termed flex in the future slides, some flex space for enrollment fluctuations so that we don't move into one of these buildings and we're fully fit out. And then next year you get an enrollment bump and I don't have a classroom to put an extra set of kids in. So we want to build in some of that flexibility and have some of that thought in here. So when originally kind of brought in to help participate with this process, we really were given by the administration team just kind of very vague guardrails. I'll say we're looking at this and this, and we want you to give us all the options in between. So where we kind of landed here is option 1, looking at pre-K 2 and 3-6 as a grade level alignment, and then looking at option 2, a pre-K 3 and 4-6 grade level alignment. Don't get too this is kind of a summary page that the next pages will explain more. But as we look at dividing those out and then comparing the number of required sections with the number of required classes, with the number of available classrooms, in each building, we can very quickly see that this will fit in this building or this will not fit in this building. And now that's not to say that the program can't be accommodated. It just means there's going to have to be improvements made to that facility for that program to be accommodated. So a few things are high-level considerations before we move forward here. I already mentioned the pre-K and K classrooms. Childs Elementary, because it is a unique architectural design, and as an architect, I can appreciate it. As a teacher or administrator, they might have different feelings, but it does also create some concerns if you do have to add on or renovate that building because it is a challenging building. Exploratory or special spaces, so that's your gym, your art, your PE, your music. Those rooms are smaller at Childs than they are at Templeton. Templeton has a full-size gym versus Childs is more of kind of a multi-purpose room. The new playground at Templeton, just keep this in mind, is designed for ages 5 and up. So it is appropriate for those younger grade levels, even though I think originally there was some perception that it wasn't. And now I think I've heard the opposite too. So, but from a design standpoint, it is appropriate for ages 5 and up. And then as we look at these classroom counts, please note that the exploratories or those special classes are not included in the enrollment numbers or spaces for enrollment numbers because of the way the building is programmed. All students will filter through those special courses. It won't be, I can't put another section in the gym because that's for PE and everybody comes down to PE, if that makes sense. And then I already mentioned the flex room, those additional rooms to just give us a little flexibility as we move forward. So looking first at what I'm calling option 1A. So this is essentially evaluating whether pre-K 2 can fit at Childs and grades 3 through 6 can fit at Templeton. On that bottom left table, you'll see the different sections there totaling up for pre-K 1 through 2, 3 classrooms for special education, the 2 flex rooms for that little bit of flexibility, totaling to 22 sections or 22 classrooms. And Childs today has 23. So I have a benefit of 1 leftover classroom. So maybe that's support services or a little extra flexibility. So to move that pre-K 2 model into this building requires no additional investment in that facility. Looking at the 3-6 grade level, into Templeton. Same process. The table in the bottom left corner of that side totals to about 24 sections or 24 classrooms and there are 26 existing classrooms in Templeton. So I end up with 2 surplus classrooms in that building as well. Now you'll notice under the pre-K 2 at Childs, we have an optional kind of item there. And that's to look at, let's say we wanted to do some of the improvements identified in the facility assessment as part of this or in tandem with this conversation. What does that look like? So I'm going to go forward to just kind of very conceptually high level what that might require. And I'll go back and notice there's a $20 million price tag associated with those improvements and a 45-month duration in terms of a schedule. So that's including design, permitting, construction to get that total timeline. And the $20 million is a total project budget, not just construction costs, just to note. So looking at that, essentially this would have us we would be doing a major renovation of that core to increase accessibility from the upper level, adding on to the front of the building to expand the office and create a better accessibility experience to the front door. We would be doing the new playground, updating lighting throughout the building, updating finishes throughout the building, replacing the HVAC system throughout the building, renovating the kindergarten classrooms as needed, but then also having to build, I believe it's 4 additional classrooms in this building to do that. So all in, oh, and the last thing I'll note, we are also trying to create a new separate buses and cars on site by creating a new curb cut to the south for car circulation so that buses can stay separate, which is a huge safety thing. So some nice and needed improvements at that building for that $20 million price tag. As I mentioned, though, doesn't necessarily have to go with this conversation, but something we wanted to be aware of. So moving forward, we're looking at option 1B. This is essentially taking option 1A and flipping the grade level alignments by building. So we want to put 3-6 at Childs and pre-K 2 at Templeton. What does that mean? So again, that bottom left corner shows you kind of the program, or what I call the program, totaling to about 24 classrooms. Because today Childs only has 23, that's a deficit of 1 classroom that I need to fit that program in that building. So to relieve that, what's required is a 2 classroom addition. We could build 1 classroom. I like 2 better. But again, that flexibility, if you're going to build 1, build 2. But that's about a $3 million investment and a 24-month duration to do that. Moving to pre-K 2 at Templeton, that's again a 22 total sections, and there's 26 available classrooms, so that fits in that building without any additional improvements. Now you'll notice on both of these we have optional improvements that could be made. The improvements at Child is a $21 million and that same 45-month duration. In this case, what I'll note to you is that $21 million would be plus the $3 million of the required for a total of a $24 million project if you were to do them together. That 45-month duration, though, is the total duration. You wouldn't add 45 with 24. So this looks very similar, and you'll notice this on subsequent options. We tried to keep the core of those renovations the same in each of the options presented for Childs. The difference here is I've got to add 8 classrooms instead of 4 that we did in the previous option 1A. We're still replacing the HVAC system, we're updating the lighting, we're updating finishes, improving accessibility, and expanding the front office. New playground, new parking, curb cuts, all of that thing. And then as you'll notice back here with Templeton, there is an optional improvement with Templeton in this model. As I mentioned previously, looking at kindergarten classrooms as possibly areas that we want to add those restrooms or additional support spaces into. So we've identified essentially 5 classrooms that might get those updates and put a cost to those with our construction partners. So as previously mentioned, that's about a $2 million, 15-month duration. One of the things that's good to note in this is 45 months seems like, wow, that's a really long time. Some of that is just the permitting piece in Bloomington, but the major part of that is trying to do construction in an occupied building. We can't just take over, do all of the construction, and then let you guys have it back because it takes too long to do it that way. We've got to work around students in the building to try to be as minimally disruptive as possible so that building can still operate. So that's a challenge that we would be dealing with, and that's why that duration gets longer. Okay. So the next option that we looked at, I'll call is option 2. So we have option 2A and 2B. So it's similar logic that we applied to option 1 and 1A. Only this time we're looking at pre-K 3 and 4-6. So in this first option, 2A, you're looking at pre-K 3 at Childs and 4-6 at Templeton. That pre-K 3 sped and flex total to 27 sections or 27 classrooms. And there are a total of 23 classrooms available at Childs. So I would need to add 4 classrooms to that building in order to accommodate that program. So what this is showing is a required cost of 4 classrooms to be built on that building at a cost of $7 million in 24 months or 2 years in order to implement that. Moving to the 4-6 at Templeton, that same program looks 4-5-6 sped flex is 19 total sections, and there are 26 available classrooms. So we end up with 7 empty classrooms at Templeton in that model. So there are no required improvements in that for Templeton in this scenario. Going back to Childs at the optional cost is again a similar process. You would take that $7 million and $17 million to total a $24 million project. And be looking at very similar improvements. In this scenario, I'm building 8 classrooms instead of 4 or 2 that we previously looked at. All of the other improvements are the same. So the complete renovation of the HVAC system, lighting, finishes, improving accessibility, office addition, etc. Then moving to option 2B. We're looking at this way, we're looking at 4-6 in Childs and pre-K 3 at Templeton. So that 4-6 grade level alignment comes to 19 sections. There are 23 available classrooms in Childs. So there are 4 extra classrooms left over when we're done with it, when we move that program into this building. Looking at pre-K 3, that totals to 27 classrooms. So there are 26 available classrooms at Templeton, so we end up with a -1. So that option requires us to build, and again, I did 2 classrooms instead of 1 just because if we're building it just makes more sense to do 2. So that's a $3 million 24-month investment to put this program in this building. You'll also notice on this option we have optional cost like we did in the previous versions. For Childs, that's $14 million 28-month cost, essentially to do those core renovations. The major difference with this option and the previous ones that have been seen is we aren't adding any additional square footage because there's enough room in the building to make the renovations without adding on. But all of the other improvements are still here. I guess we are adding on the front of the building for the office expansion, but that is the only addition in this model. And then at Templeton, it's those same kindergarten renovations that were recommended in the pre-K 2 option at Templeton. So it's those same kindergarten room, restrooms, or renovations that would be provided. And then as mentioned in a couple of the other options, for that pre-K 3 option at Templeton, you would need to add the $3 million and $2 million together for $5 million, and it'd be a 24-month total duration for that project. So lastly, we looked at what does it mean if we wanted to say, what if we took both facilities in a pre-K 6 grade level alignment at either of these buildings? So I'm going to start with Templeton on this one. Looking at Templeton, you can see the program there totals to about 46 sections, or 46 classrooms with 26 available. That means I need an additional 20 classrooms to accommodate this grade configuration in this building. What we're showing in kind of the conceptual image above is a 2-story, 20 classroom addition, kind of pushing out towards Henderson and Hillside on that building. We think that's very feasible. There's also some renovations that would have to be considered, like the cafeteria would likely need to be enlarged in this scenario because of the number of kids you have. And then I think another important note for us to think about, we go back to the Templeton assessment piece where we showed the site diagram. Thinking of having 850 to 900 students on this site, the circulation would certainly be a challenge with buses, cars, pedestrians, bike riders. That would certainly be a challenge for this site given the limited space available. The flip side of that, looking at a pre-K 6 configuration at Childs, again, the total program is the same, but we would need 23 classrooms instead of 20. And when we started to evaluate how we could add that many classrooms or that much space on this building, it very quickly becomes untenable from a cost and timing perspective. It really starts to make more sense to build a new facility in this scenario. So where we projected that to be about a $55 million endeavor, taking about 36 months or 3 years to implement. What that doesn't show you is, as we go back again to that site plan, is where you could build that facility on that site while keeping the existing building operational at the same time. That would really be a challenge just because of the limited availability space. So just something to be aware of. But conceptually, that's where that cost would land. So my last slide here is looking just kind of at a summary page of those options so you can kind of see. So in option 1A, that's pre-K 2 at Childs, 3-6 at Templeton. There are really no required improvements to that, to either of those facilities to implement that type of grade level alignment in those facilities. Then there is an optional improvement cost over there for $20 million, 45 months. Those are those core renovations that could be part of this or not in terms of the conversation. Then moving to option 1B, that's where we flip those. So we have 3-6 at Childs and pre-K 2 at Templeton. That will require a $3 million investment at Childs, but no investment at Templeton. And then again, the optional costs are broken out in a separate column. Moving to option 2A, this is pre-K 3 at Childs and 4-6 at Templeton. That requires a $7 million total investment and about 2 years to implement that. And again, there are some optional costs there. And then option 2B, we're looking at 4-6 at Childs and pre-K 3 at Templeton. That's about a $3 million cost over a 24-month duration in terms of required improvements. And then that option 3 is the final. So we talked about a replacement facility for pre-K 6 at Childs is about a $55 million endeavor. Adding on a 20 classroom addition at Templeton is about $24 million. And then we did have one last option there, is looking at what about a pre-K 6 facility on a third alternative site. And that's probably a $60 million plus endeavor. Land cost is the big variable there that we would have to figure out where you would need 20 to 25 acres ideally to build a new elementary school, especially a pre-K 6 of that size. So just we wanted to have that as a barometer as we were looking at all these different considerations. And the last thing I'll mention is if you were to choose any of those pre-K 6 scenarios, we have to think about what happens to Childs or Templeton or both should you choose to move programming around in a different way. What programs would need to occupy those spaces? So with that, the last piece I'm just going to say here is kind of my disclaimer and protection for me. The presented design concepts are very preliminary, very conceptual in nature, and they would change with any design. That if you said, hey, we want to proceed with this one, we would certainly not come back to this as the final solution. It would evolve over time. That's just part of the process. And we certainly encourage a collaborative design process. Most of all these were made in isolation, so conversations about small group rooms and intervention space and corridors, like we want to have all of those should one of these endeavors be wanted to pursue further. The estimated construction cost, again, are conceptual based off the conceptual designs that we have put together here and made it a snapshot in time. So if you come back to me 5 years and say, well, from now and ask me why it's $10 million more expensive, I was like, well, those costs were 5 years old, so that's why. And I think that's everything, but essentially just don't tie my hands too close to anything because it was a very conceptual exercise. So I think that is all. We appreciate you giving us the opportunity to provide this information to you. We appreciate our partnership with MCCSC and happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much. And it's clear how much work has gone into this presentation and into the site survey as well. Do we have any questions for Mr. Height right now that you want to answer?
Just a comment that 1967 was not 60 years ago. As someone who was born at the end of that year, you're pushing me ahead a little bit.
Sorry.
So let's just stick to like 1967 was 57 almost for me, 58 years ago. So. But anyway, thanks for the presentation. It was really great. I'm just teasing.
I have a couple questions. So in some of the models that you showed that would require some financial investment in Childs, is that, I assume that that covers not only the renovations necessary to accommodate the merger, but also to address some of those ADA issues?
Correct. So if on those, which I guess I can go back to. So on these renovations, and this is probably the best example because we're not adding anything additional. There's about $14 million of improvements that are kind of recommended in this. So that would be updating the HVAC system, replacing lighting, improving the ADA accessibility around the building, office expansion so we can provide some additional of those support service areas, the new playground. All of those are kind of built into that cost right now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the ADA thing is really important to me. All four of my kids went to Childs, and when I had a baby, learning to walk, going down those stairs to enter the school was a tough thing. So, I mean, I just didn't ever really think about it because it wasn't in my vision, but it's definitely not welcoming to anybody that is, that has a disability, being able to get in there. Going in the side door is just not very welcoming.
Did you have another
I
question?
have one more question,
Yeah,
but
sure, no,
if
go
anybody
ahead.
else does, feel free. I just have one other question, Brent. And maybe playgrounds aren't necessarily your area of expertise, but I do have a question about the playground. I know you said the new playground at Templeton is 5+. Does that mean that if we put 3 and 4-year-olds there, we'd have to make some changes to the playground?
I don't believe it would require changes to the playground. Now, keep in mind there is a pre-K playground at Templeton as well, separate from the main playground. So that's generally where the pre-K kids are today. There may be some select pieces of equipment that you would not let those younger kids use programmatically, but I don't know that it would require any like structural changes to the improvements that are there.
Might require someone to like climb up and fish them out.
Not it.
Other questions for Mr. Height? Okay, cool. Thank you so much for that, and we can move into board discussion a little bit. I know that this is a lot of information, great information. I'm so glad to have the information that we do. And so I wondered if we wanted to take it sort of in pieces and start with the information that Dr. Winston gave us to start, just thinking about the update of the Childs-Templeton merger, the sort of pain points that we've heard and things like that. And then we can move into any of this other building stuff if we'd like.
Can we ask Ms. Harmon a question too?
We absolutely can.
Does anybody else want to speak?
Well, I'm sure we'll speak.
Okay,
Go ahead, ask your question.
So, hi, Ms. Harmon. I had just one question. So, when you said you presented the considerations for pre-K 3 and grades 4 through 6, are you saying that that's your recommended configuration, or yes?
From an instructional perspective, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm done now.
No, that's a good question and food for thought after seeing this presentation as well.
I'm sorry, I'm just saying recommended if we're looking at a primary or intermediate model, that it would be pre-K 3, 4 through 6 versus pre-K 2.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's really
3 through
helpful.
6.
Yep, helpful.
I like the idea of, I don't know how feasible it is or how much it would cost, what the thing is, but as a parent, being able to walk up to the school and have your kid get on a bus to go to the other school sounds like a way of alleviating that pain point.
Yeah.
For parents with the
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember very early on when we were just sort of speculating about some of this and what that could look like, and not really having, the information of how many students and how many are walkers or how many, and we have some of that information now. I do think, still thinking about a school to school shuttle or something like that, right? That rather than like an official bus route, it's literally there's a school to school shuttle that people can walk, or kids can walk to their sort of homeschool, be bused or by shuttle to Templeton, whatever, and then vice versa, right? And that shuttle would also then work or be in sort of use for the extended day, right? So that people would return to their sort of walkable homeschool, um, or whatever that might mean, so that like parents always only had one point of drop off or pickup, or whatever that might be, right? So I can imagine that that might help alleviate some of the double drop off questions that we've seen, or double pickups for sure. And I don't like, these are just speculative. Like, I don't know in terms of transportation what's possible, but I think that it's something that we could probably consider.
Because it used to be when my kids were little that if you want to do Alps in elementary school, you had to go on a different schedule and put your child on a high school bus to get to the Alps. And I know that that staggered time was challenging, so I can see how that would be a problem.
Yeah.
But obviously it's closer. It's not all over the whole
Right.
district like that was back in the day. So in the old days.
Yeah.
But anyway, I like the idea of being able to help alleviate that. The thing about extended day care and whether you pay for what you pay as you go or what, I just don't feel comfortable doing something like that only for Childs-Templeton. If we're going to do that at
Yeah,
all, I feel
absolutely.
like that it shouldn't come at the cost of other people doing it in other elementary schools.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
that would be.
When I saw that, it's something I've heard as well in the district, or something that people have asked for. Like, it'd be nice if we could have extended day that we paid for as we went, rather than. And I recognize too, I want to just say, from a staffing perspective, that's complicated, because you never know how many people you're staffing for, right? So you don't know if you're staffing for 20 kids or 40 kids, or so from a staffing perspective, I think that's probably complicated. But I understand from a sort of cost perspective for it to be beneficial. But yes, I think that that's something that sits outside of the merger conversation. Like, how many days you can use extended, or how, that is something I think is a district wide conversation then, rather than exclusive to a merger conversation.
I guess I'm just not sure how it works, because I seem to remember when my daughter, who's a senior now, was in maybe kindergarten and first grade,
Mhm.
we only needed to use 1 day a week.
Yeah.
So now that's.
It's different now. You have to pay the full, like the full month.
So if you only needed 4 days a month.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. But right, but I could, like if you made your month's schedule ahead of time, like most people, like not most people, but a lot of people have some advance notice. Like schedules might be made if you are a healthcare worker, for example, 6 weeks out, so you might know your task. So if that could alleviate, if there were deadlines by which you submitted your request,
Mhm.
or that people could make staffing decisions on the extended day end.
Yeah, no,
Possible.
that makes sense. And I actually remember when my son was in daycare, for a while they had a part-time model, and the part-time model depended on someone else also needing a part-time model, so they were still staffed fully for a full time or a full load, but it was like I would take 2 of the 3 days and they would take 3, or vice versa, whatever it was. But it was a sort of shared model in that way. So yes,
Sounds complicated.
it sounds complicated, right? And it is probably complicated. Any other sort of comments or questions or thoughts as we've been hearing some of this stuff tonight?
As I really like how these points are laid out. So whoever did this in this manner, thank you. Because when I look at each one of these, with a few exceptions, many of them are reasonable, and I think that there are things that could definitely be things we could offer. I mean, school tours. I mean, that seems like a no-brainer. Or offering teachers time to collaborate, or all of these things seem like that should, it makes sense. And it's other things I question, like, I don't know what it means when it says keep siblings together. Because if you have children in different grades, I don't know how you could do that. Or having the phased merger, that seems like that might be a little bit more difficult to manage as well. But by and large, so many of these things seem like reasonable asks. And I can understand why people would want these. And I appreciate the people that took the time to come and offer constructive criticism and offer solutions. I mean, that is really, really helpful. One question I have is regarding one of the public comment earlier, when that date of June 27th was brought up. So that is something that's outside the normal contract, correct? Like,
Yes.
so was the ask for getting additional pay for those 4 weeks, or like I'm not exactly sure what was being asked for allowing those 4 weeks. I want to make sure I understand.
I didn't hear an ask for additional pay.
Okay, but just allowing those times. Is
But
that
that's something that we would certainly engage in conversation regarding.
okay? Sure. Okay, because I was trying to make sure I was understanding
So
what exactly is.
we would definitely want to get further clarification regarding the specificity of the ask.
Mhm.
At this moment in time, having the rooms available for occupancy is
Okay.
how I interpreted the ask
Okay.
at face value.
Okay. Yeah, because I would just want, like, as someone who doesn't necessarily deal with the building during the time it's closed, what exactly all needs to be put in place.
Yeah.
Because I want to, I think it would be good to obviously
Yeah, no, I
meet
think
people
that's
where they are and what they need. So.
absolutely.
Well, the fact of the matter is that our teachers will need time
Mhm.
to prepare classrooms, to get things ready. There's no doubt about that. That's a requirement every year. Teachers are doing that a couple days before school starts, but some are doing it prior to. And with the unusual nature of such a merger, I think there may well be an unspoken ask regarding additional time.
Sure.
Well, I think it's not even necessarily an ask, but it's just potentially a necessity, right? I mean, if we're thinking about, because you think about when you teach in a building and you have your stuff in a building, especially if you've been in the same classroom for a long time, you have a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes teachers have to move from classroom to classroom in a building, based on room reassignment or new needs or whatever, like that's happened too. And, it's a sort of labor intensive process, but it's one thing when you're moving to the room down the hall and another when you're moving a building, right? And so I think, the sort of having that space ready for occupancy just means that the things aren't being moved into place at the same time that the teachers are moving into buildings, first of all, because that would just be chaotic. And second, I think, understanding that potentially if we're moving across buildings, teachers may need more time to collaborate in new spaces, to sort of establish their own, PLCs that are new this year and all of those sorts of things that happen as you move into a school year. So, I think it's a reasonable expectation that there might be some additional days that are paid,
Sure.
But obviously all of those things would sort of come in discussion with our union.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I just wanted, 4 weeks to start sorting. Obviously, that's going to take time,
Yeah.
especially if you have reorganized libraries
Yep.
and things like that. But I just wanted to understand what
Totally.
and let people know I'm hearing
Mhm.
these things as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. Other things that stand out about some of these complexities of decision making, the items we have here from Parent Voice.
It was a lot of things that I had personally been thinking about in terms of what this success would look like. It looks like most of what I had on my list is included from the parent perspective. So that was good to see that I felt like I was in alignment with what others were thinking, even including wondering if there was a way to do a tiered approach, but ultimately it came up to that would be too difficult, but it did cross my mind as well. There's a couple of things though that I didn't see on here that I did want to pose, And it mostly comes down to making sure that we're also considering that there's some intentional cultural engagements with our schools, things like that, because we do have two virtually segregated schools, and there's going to be a lot of differences. For example, when Dr. Marquet went through and talked about unhoused populations, there aren't any of those students currently at Childs, and there are at Templeton. And that comes with different needs. So that may also require additional training for teachers that haven't had to engage with students in those spaces before. So that was something that I wanted to raise, as well as making sure that when this goes through, whenever it does, that we're checking in at least on a quarterly basis with our schools to find out what's working, what's not, where do we need to make adjustments, what's the 3-year outlook, what's the 5-year outlook, those kinds of things, gathering that metric and not just based on test scores, because as we know, test scores don't look at the whole child. So overall student success, we've talked a lot about disciplinary things. How's that changed? Those kinds of things. And it looks like the consideration was for joint PTO activities. Maybe I'm just putting it out there for y'all. Unifying that overall. My pipe dream is to have all of the PTOs unified. That's not something we have oversight over. I'm just putting a plug in there for it. Because I think that helps benefit all of our schools really well to help meet needs of everybody and really be a community. I think that's what I got for now. But I appreciated being able to see comprehensively what's been being discussed.
Unifying all PTOs in the district. Do you want to get reelected? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I think I think it's actually a great idea. And I think there's so much value in thinking about a unified PTO, but especially between these schools, I think is a really potentially great idea in helping to sort of cultivate, create, unify, cement this sort of new culture that lives across both of those spaces. And as Ashley said, we really don't have sort of oversight. That would have to be something that was led by those sort of PTO organizations, but something certainly that I think could be very, very beneficial in this process. And one of the things, Ashley, you were speaking to just now about, how do we measure? What are we tracking? I think that's in part, why we put this together, because while we know that kindergarten readiness and our iLearn or iRead scores and those things of that nature are important markers of academic success, they are not the entirety of what constitutes success for most of us sitting on this board when we think about what a successful merger is. And so I think it's important that we've listed out these other things like positive school climate and culture and student social emotional health and the PBIS and things of that nature, so that we have our eye on, yes, the academic outcomes, but also what is the climate in these schools as a result? How are our students engaging with one another in new ways, potentially, in productive ways? And I think that also speaks to, when we think about the way in which we move into this, I do hope that we are intentional, and I trust that this administration is incredibly intentional about this. But it's not, necessarily even just training for our teachers, but I think it's all of us sort of being willing to engage in new ways with one another, in new conversations, to sort of enter into these spaces with sort of the idea of what's possible, right? And to bring the things that we love most from those school communities, like parts that we love most that we've heard over and over from families, like this is what makes this school feel like a home, to help create that for more students I think would be a really sort of beautiful and successful thing for me. There's something else that sort of struck me, but anybody else comments or questions?
Just while we're still talking about test scores, I think it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to anticipate an initial. It's possible that you might even have an initial dip in
Yes.
scores, and that doesn't indicate that it was a failure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I teach at the university level, and a few years ago when we totally redesigned a curriculum, we knew that we may see lower pass rates for the licensing exam that our students all take. But again, that doesn't mean that it was wrong to do it. It's just that is a natural thing that can happen. And so I
Yes.
think if we acknowledge this is something that could possibly happen just because of the transitions, but not, it doesn't indicate something has gone terribly wrong either.
That was actually the other thing that I was trying to remember but couldn't. So thank you, because I think I mentioned that elsewhere. That a lot of times in an initial transition year or change, we do tend to see all kinds of things, right? And so you might see an initial drop, you might see an initial decrease, and so those are just sort of not indicators of success. You have to look out farther. You have to look out at the 2 or 3 or 5 year projections. Um, but I do want to say that I would not be surprised if there were some discrepancy, or everything sort of stayed the same, or there was a little decrease, or so I don't expect that year one out of the gate you see everybody sort of soar, because that kind of change takes time anyway to see the impact of those numbers. Um, takes time, right? A kid doesn't get into a new environment and the next day test in a different way. That's just not how it works.
And I would
Yes.
say, going off of that, I do think it's something, when I think of a successful merger, is that we would need to set some, 3 or 5 years sort of when we're going to continue to check the kind of where those scores are. Because research does say, and this is why I think we're all doing this, that students in integrated schools have higher average test scores. So I think in the 3 or 5 year, whatever the administration would decide on, that we would want to check in with that to make sure that that is actually happening. And I think that would be one of those indicators that this was a successful merger. I think it'd be also interesting, there's other stats on students in integrated schools are more likely to enroll in college, things that we can sort of follow. This will be, more than 5 years. And also students in integrated schools are less likely to drop out. So those kind of numbers, I think, are ones that the administration, I know, will be watching, but also then projecting those out as we get those numbers in. I think that's something that I would say would sort of prove that this was a successful merger. And then if that stuff is not coming how we think it is, then the administration and the board looking at what are the reasons for that, where did things go wrong, what kind of things we need to change in that. But and I know we've already talked about the reasons why, but I do think that all of this, hearing all of the conversation about the school buildings, it's a lot. It's a lot. But I do think looking at why we're doing this, and some of again, a quote from the Future of School Integration says that efforts that focus on turning around high poverty schools solely through more resources, better teachers, new leadership, discount considerable evidence of persistent association between level of poverty in a school and low achievement. And I think that another one to me from that same is a school's socioeconomic makeup is in fact a stronger predictor of whether a child will succeed in school than any other factor. So for me, I think even looking at all the different things that we have to sort of piece through and the puzzle that this is, I think that that these are the reasons why I think all of us on the board are willing to move forward with this, because of the research that shows that this is something that can change many kids' lives and trajectories, not just low-income kids, high-income kids as well. And so I think that I'm glad that we're walking through this. I know it's a difficult conversation, but I think that it is worth it to move forward in this because of these things that we know about high poverty schools.
Yeah, I think I must have looked at the same article, Brandon, from the Century Foundation, I believe, because
was
it
one of
did
mine.
mention those stats. So it'd be interesting to look at those 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road in terms of dropout rates or college enrollment. But then I think it's important also, like you brought up the point about this isn't just going to help people in schools with lower test scores. I mean, the other benefits that everyone can receive are improvement in student satisfaction, intellectual self-confidence, developing leadership skills, creating meaningful relationships across different groups. So it's there's positives all around, and so I think if we just focus on this is something that's going, instead of thinking there are people who are going to suffer and people who are going to benefit, like everyone is going to benefit in some way and maybe not suffer as much as previously thought. So yeah. So
So as I was thinking about that question of what does a successful merger look like, I was thinking sort of about short-term measures of success, kind of short to intermediate measures of success, and then long-term measures of success. And I kind of want to come back to my short-term measures for success in a minute, but and I'm going to reiterate some of the things that you all touched on as well. That for me, the short to intermediate measure of success, one of them is that idea of climate and culture and community. I think that's something we've heard a lot of parents and community members and teachers say is to either identify as a concern or something that they hope that we are mindful of. And I think we all are, that part of the thing that makes them nervous about the change maybe is they don't want to lose that climate and that culture and that community. And I agree. I think it was Aaron that said that this is laid out in a way that really helps us identify what are the ways in which we can address those concerns. We have talked a little bit about having events around the transition specifically in order to create a sense of community. If I understand it correctly, Title I actually requires a certain number of events at schools that are labeled Title I schools. And I think that those events are funded with a combination of things like PTO funds as well as money from the school and maybe Title I as well. I think that, for example, might be one way in which we could, if we continued those kinds of events, regardless of Title I status, that might be a way of continuing to create community and a climate that is welcoming to everyone. That seems like maybe a low hanging fruit thing that we could do. I heard parents specifically at Templeton identify those Title I events as one of the foundations of the community that they've been able to create in that school. And I think Aaron said that a lot of these things do feel like things that are achievable. And then to Brandon's point, as a long-term goal, I was also thinking measures of success that we've seen from the literature are identified as outcomes that you expect when schools are integrated. The only thing I would add is, and this was probably implied in what Brandon said, is a reduction in the disparities of learning outcomes between our priority populations and our student body at large. Ms. Harmon highlighted that disparity for us in our presentation last month, and it would be nice if we started to see that disparity reduced in the long term over time. And then I said I want to come back to my short term goals because I think short term is sometimes the seemingly least meaningful. I think in the short term, our goal is to balance socioeconomic status in reliance on the literature and evidence that exists of the benefits of that. And I would just say that we want to balance that socioeconomic status while minimizing any consequences or harm. I think we all in this room recognize there will be some consequences, some pain points, as Dr. Winston refers to them. For me, many of the things on here, all of the things on here, I really empathize with, and I think think there was only one that Dr. Winston said we definitely can't do that, but the rest of them, it seems to me like there's some opportunity to address most of these things. The two that I want to highlight that are somewhat represented here and maybe not is one, this issue of ADA compliance and accessibility. I think we all agree that that's something we need to address regardless. I would just say that that's also it's also important to me that we address that as we merge these two populations, because again, I think it was last month when we were looking at stats from the two schools, it seemed like there were almost twice as many kids on IPEs at Templeton as at Childs, and also, of course, we're aware that children who live near the poverty line have lots of challenges at home. I wouldn't want to add to that by putting them in a building that is also not accessible. So while that's always important, I think it's extra important as we consider merging these two populations. And then the other one that I know we've talked a lot about, but I didn't necessarily see represented here was the things that we might lose as the result of a changing status in Title I. Things like universal free and reduced lunch. Is extended day free for everyone at Templeton right now?
No.
I think it is at Fairview. That's why I was okay. So maybe that one's not an example, but we know that there are going to be some changes if one of our buildings, if their Title I status changes, and I hope we can think about strategies to minimize those harms as well. I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Erin. I think those are really great comments and just things to think about, because I think none of us are. I mean, I think we all recognize, right, that there are challenges and there are pain points and there are definitely things that we may compromise, negotiate, lose, gain. I mean, there's no single change process that happens where everything stays the same, because it's not change, right? And so recognizing that change will inevitably require some movement of things. And I just, to your point too, because I think we've had these conversations for quite some time now, and I think one of the things, as you think about your short to mid-term sort of goals, that question of what makes a successful merger, I think the notion of desegregating these schools is in and of itself a goal, right? And so when people say what makes a successful merger, and we have all of these things on the plate, and yes, we're concerned about climate and culture, and yes, we're concerned about academic success, and yes, we're concerned, and we are also concerned about the segregated nature of our schools. And so to desegregate is already in and of itself a success in my book, right? And so I think that that's important for our community to hear, that we consider a desegregated school and a merger of school populations that results in that desegregation as a success. Now, that is not the end all be all, because of course we want to make sure that whatever we do is with the best interests of our students in mind, to minimize harm, to minimize that transitional sort of chaos that can happen, right, if those things aren't done well. And so I think that's the reason why we've embarked on this really long process, because if we only cared about desegregating the school and that was the end goal, the end, none of this would be happening, right? So I think it's important for our community here that that is a goal. We will consider that a success. And we want to ensure that in doing that, we do as much as we can to minimize the frustration, the complication, and the harm for all of the stakeholders involved: teachers, staff, students, parents, everyone, right? So
I just brought it down so I could see you better, but I will say that I hope that we will all give each other grace. That I know that we have amazing teachers at both buildings, and that there's going to be a lot of pain points for everybody involved in this. And I think that if we assume best intentions, if we give grace, if we don't know what we don't know, I think if we're looking for the positive and speaking our gratitude, it will go a lot better.
Yeah, and I think, in case it, I think it was obvious, but I want to say for myself that while I do think it's important to be mindful of those harms and minimize consequences, I still haven't seen anything that outweighs the potential benefit of integration or desegregation. So for me, when I balance those things, especially considering that we can address some of those harms and consequences, I still very much feel that overall the benefit of integration outweighs any of those things that we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
And my hope too, I can only speak for myself, is that because it can look like we're picking on two schools right now, that this isn't just a goal of us for these two
Right.
schools, but this is a movement, hopefully, for a priority that the board has for the future of MCCSC schools, as far as looking at ways that not just for Childs and Templeton, but all the elementary schools, that we can gain SES balance. Because I could see for parents right now it feeling like, well, you're only looking at these two schools and then you're going to move on. That's not my understanding or my personal feelings on this. I can't speak for the rest of the board, but I do hope that this is just us saying that and showing that we care about SES balance of the whole school, and we're moving to work on that in one area, and we'll hopefully continue to work on that as we get guidance from the administration and as the board continues to look at this.
Yeah, absolutely. So are there any other comments on the update and or on the CSO portion of this? Do you have any comments or questions or things to say about the building piece at this point?
Just for me to say, if if people are concerned about the cost, some of these things were brought to light by parents in both buildings, and they're things that would likely need to be done anyway, and not
Yes.
that it was any spending was because of this merger, but because it was something that needed.
Well, I mean, we
to
saw
happen.
in that in the CSO presentation that there is a 0-0 cost option
Right.
from a merger perspective, right?
Mhm.
You could merge populations, maybe not with the K through 3 sort of instructional model, but you could do a K through 2 and a 3 through 6, and there's zero cost associated with the movement of kids into buildings. But what we have seen as a result of this is that there are
Brought to
things,
light, like,
right,
oh, yeah,
that need to happen. And I think those things, as you were saying, those are irrespective of the merger. Making Child's ADA accessible, I think, is, for me, it's a must do. We
Yeah,
can't have
absolutely.
our school buildings
Right.
be inaccessible in this way.
Mhm.
So for me, whether or not the merger happens, and I'm not saying whether or not, I'm saying outside of that conversation, I think this is an important thing to take on.
We want our students to have good air quality in any building,
Right,
and we
of course.
want all students to have access to the building.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
I had some HVAC questions that I sat on, so Sam, if you could be prepared for that next time.
You can ask
You
him
know,
now.
just in the event of another pandemic or whatever, I have some questions about that.
That's always good to be thinking about. Yeah, totally.
I do have a question for Dr. Winston too. Oh, go ahead, Kathy.
No, the only thing I wanted to say is that when you're looking at that data, it seems like the board needs to do a study or with the administration about our transfer policy.
Yes.
And I think that needs to be something that we really need to clearly think through and maybe take action on. Because if our transfer policy is enabling more segregation, then we should look at it. That was all.
No, I'm glad you made that point. I sort of spoke for you, Dr. Winston, when I said there weren't any of the things on here that are can't do's. Do you feel like there are any of the suggestions on your slides that are either can't do's or very difficult to do items?
Great question.
And I can just put it out there as a for future thought
Yes,
question
let's do
too.
that.
Yeah.
I think there are many more things on here that are can do's, to be sure. I think there are probably a couple things that might be a challenge, but not necessarily impossible. I might turn to my team and see if any members of my team see any on this list. And I am going to give credit to Mrs. Harmon for the organizational structure of this. When we were talking about putting this together, she wanted her suggestion was, let's organize it in this manner, similar to what we did with the complexity. So But does anybody on our team see anything that's an absolute not able to do from your perspective? I think the phased merger
Yeah.
notion is an understandable one, and yet I do see some unique challenges in being able to pull that off successfully and effectively. So I'm not suggesting that it's a can't do, but I think there are some additional complexities to being able to do that successfully. So that's one thing that definitely would jump out at me.
I would want to add, I can't point to one specific thing and I would need further study, but there could be things on the list that contradict each other potentially, right? So we could do any of them, but there might be two that couldn't simultaneously be done. But I'm not spending enough time sitting here thinking about that,
Fair enough.
but that might be a possibility that some might have to be considered in the context of others.
That's a good point to bring up.
Yeah, and I should say I did make a note that at least one of them, I think the staggered start time sounded like there were maybe an equal number of people who wanted that and didn't want that. So maybe
Exactly.
some of
That
them
is true.
aren't even clear whether those are preferences or not.
And we certainly are engaging with our transportation team. Dr. Henderson has been leading that body of work, and we'll have some considerations to come forward at the next board meeting around what those options might be and how time and start time might be impacted as a result.
And I think the one thing that I would add to that conversation, Dr. Winston, is that the choices that we make with regard to the transportation decisions that we eventually land on have different costs associated with them depending upon the option. So those costs are not represented in the information that was presented tonight by CSO, but are real and potentially ongoing costs that we will need to consider as we make the decisions about how we make transportation as family friendly as we possibly can.
It's good to know. Yes, you're welcome. All right. Well, I think that gets us through this portion for this meeting this month. Thank you to all of you who contributed in presenting that information to us. Next, we will receive an update on elementary redistricting from Dr. Winston.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to bring an update. I've had an opportunity to share some updates at the July board meeting, at the August board meeting. We didn't have any new information to share at the September board meeting. But as I update you now, there are a few things that have happened over the last several weeks that I think are important for folks to be aware of. Just as a friendly reminder, in February of this year, the Board of School Trustees did pass a board resolution regarding attendance zone reconfiguration. And I have this slide in here just as also as a reminder to our audience regarding the commitment that was made at that particular time. The commitment was to a strategic plan that the fact of the matter is that the board had already committed to a strategic plan that prioritizes equitable opportunities to maximize education success, and that part of that work is acknowledging the imbalance that happens related to SES. And you've heard our trustees speak very eloquently on that this evening, specifically given the fact that we have a significant range of a high SES percentage of 64% to our lowest. And so that's a significant component of the reasoning why we're moving in this direction. You've also heard information that our elementary attendance zones have not been comprehensively modified since 1997, and that there have been a lot of comments from our community feedback at public events over the last 12 months advocating for studying comprehensive redistricting. And therefore, we've been directed to study and examine attendance zones with the intent to create greater balance between our elementary schools. So I wanted to kind of highlight those pieces of the resolution, and so that folks would just kind of be reminded of where we are, how we got here. And ultimately, the Board of Trustees would like to move toward implementation in the 25-26 school year. So I wanted to kind of highlight the word toward. So from a timeline perspective, I do think it's important for you to know that the board resolution was in February. We had a contract that was signed and approved by the board at the May board in May with Business Information Services on helping us to begin to examine some potential scenarios, some considerations. Several members of the board and myself met with the consultant mid-May just to begin to lay out some expectations, to begin to identify direction. And my first board update was in July, second was in August, and then our teams have continued to meet. We have a redistricting study team primarily comprised of members from our data team and our information services team to provide data and information, enrollment information to the consultant, and then really providing opportunities every couple of weeks, every 3 weeks, to meet with the consultant to provide insight as to some of the realities within our corporation. So I just wanted to give a brief timeline update so that you kind of know where we've been and what's been done up to this particular point in time. One of the things, in addition to the redistricting study, a component of that involves a demographic study as well. So kind of two components built within this one partnership. And so there are several components that are going to come out of this demographic study. I'm particularly excited about this because I think it's going to provide some additional information that will inform both current practice as well as future practice and decision making. Some of the key findings, we will have some very high level takeaways. We will have some information that looks at 5-10 years out from now in terms of trend data, particularly as it relates to enrollment projections. There's an opportunity for our consultant to have conducted some enrollment analyses for the past several years, as well as a 5 to 10 year projection in terms of what might we expect our enrollment to look like in the future. We know that since COVID, we've had some enrollment declines. That's not unusual across this country. Almost every school district in the country, and certainly throughout the state of Indiana, has experienced enrollment declines. Our enrollment declines went from somewhere close to about 10,800 students the year prior to COVID to approximately 10,100 today. That's a pretty significant dip. We've kind of vacillated just a little bit, but we were already having seeing some decline prior to COVID, but nothing significant. We haven't recovered completely. So the demographic profile is going to give us a lot of information in that regard. One of the things that you have to pay close attention to is birth rate. What are the birth rates across the country? Well, across the country, they're declining pretty significantly. And here in the state of Indiana and also in Monroe County, we aren't having as many babies born as has been in the past. And so that's certainly going to contribute to our school-age population. Population and enrollment profiles. He's doing some work on that as well. Economic profile. What does that do to our economy and how is that contributing to what's happening within our schools? Housing and building. We've got new construction happening, and people may have some thoughts and assumptions around what that new construction might mean relative to enrollment projections. And so we're very excited about the fact that we have recently been able to talk with our consultant about some of his preliminary calculations and projections regarding our future enrollment and where we need to be, and also some potential decisions that we would want to look at. So as he continues to provide some guidance to us regarding potential scenarios, he also is looking very closely at Childs-Templeton. We've asked him to pay very close attention to Childs-Templeton within the whole conversation so that we can make the best decision possible based upon the most accurate information. So what we've done are going to continue to do. Our redistricting study team is going to continue to work with our consultant. We're going to continue to look at redistricting across the country. There's been a lot of redistricting that's happened. There are a lot of lessons that have been learned. We're looking at our data, our enrollment data, looking at our transfer data. So I do appreciate that comment that was made earlier. Not only have we looked at our transfer data, we're looking at our transfer policies because we will have to make some decisions regarding our go-forward strategy. Our consultant has been crystal clear about that. If we continue to have the flexible transfer policies that exist, then why would you move forward with redistricting? So I think that there are some opportunities for the school board to make some determinations, and you will be able to do that because our team will be providing you with additional information. And so to that end, our Business Information Services consultant will be here at our November board meeting, and we are asking him to share with us some of the preliminary findings that he has so far. So we're very excited about that opportunity to be able to bring that information forward, so that information can also be considered in the context of our merger conversation and the larger redistricting conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Winston. Are there any comments or questions from the board?
On redistricting specifically.
Okay, great. Do we have any final comments or reports from the board under comments or committee reports?
I do. I know I've said this to you all probably 15 times over the past few weeks, but I did have the opportunity to attend the NAACP of Monroe County's celebration of the anniversary of Brown versus Board. And first of all, I just really want to thank them for that event. It was really interesting to hear from the panel people who attended MCCSC during the time of racial desegregation, as well as some of our more recent graduates talking about their experiences within our schools. And I don't see Ruth here. I know that we have a good relationship with not only the education committee of the NAACP, but the membership. And I hope that they'll continue to stay engaged with us throughout this process, because for me, some of the most interesting comments at that event were about some of the harms. I think while we can all agree that Brown versus Board is worth celebrating, we can't overlook the fact that there were some harms that came from the process of desegregation after that decision as well. And I think as I was looking at the summaries from some of the literature, there's some overlap between things that we should be mindful of now and things that we can learn from the history of that. So I'm glad that we have that partnership, and we'll continue to work with them.
Thanks so much, Erin, and thanks for attending that. I really appreciate that. Any other committee reports or comments from the board generally? Okay. Finally, Dr. Winston, do you have any additional information to share?
I do have a couple. So, in terms, you heard a little bit about our next Childs-Templeton Community Forum being held at Childs Elementary on Thursday, November 7th from 6 to 7:30. We also are having our next Parent University on Tuesday, October 29th. That's next Tuesday. And that one is going to focus on how to be a math person and have your child be one too. So we've had a lot of interest and requests for some workshops for our parents and our families regarding math. So that's happening next Tuesday, October 29th, here at the CoLab from 6 to 7 p.m. And Muffins with Marquet, our next Muffins with Marquet is this coming Friday. I will be at Lakeview Elementary. Parents and families are encouraged to join me in the library at 9:15. Comment cards will be available for parents who have limited time for conversation but would like to share celebrations, successes, concerns, or suggestions. Reminder that next Thursday is Halloween. Please be extra cautious if you are on the road, as many of our children will be out trick-or-treating. We want everyone to have fun and to be safe. MCCSC events, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that we have one last opportunity to see Bloomington High School Sounds of South presentation of Beauty and the Beast this Saturday, October 26th. Tickets can be purchased through Buskirk Chumley. Also, Bloomington North Theater is presenting Antigone. Their performances are Friday, October 25th, and Saturday, October 26th at 7 p.m., and Sunday, October 27th at 2 p.m. For tickets, please visit Bloomington North's box office, which can also be found on the North's website. And we have so many athletic events rounding out a tremendous fall sports season. This Saturday alone, we have the following events. Both North and South boys and girls cross-country teams will be competing in the regionals. South boys soccer will be competing in the semi-state. North volleyball will compete in the regionals. South boys tennis doubles Connor Couch and Joshua Sang will compete Friday in the doubles quarterfinals and hopefully to the semifinals and state final on Saturday. And North and South football will be competing in sectionals on November 1st. Games will be played in Terre Haute. And finally, there will be no school on November 5th. That's election day, but our teachers and our administrators will be in professional learning opportunities, and over 50 teachers are going to be providing professional development sessions to their colleagues. There's nothing scarier nor more rewarding than having our own educators who are experts in their field delivering high quality instruction and professional development to our teachers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Winston, and thank you all in attendance tonight. And to those of you watching, I know it was a long meeting. The next regularly scheduled board meeting is Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. And with that, we are adjourned. Okay.
In the near future.